single soul. It's December 24th, say 1972. You're cozy in your bed, fighting to stay awake so you can catch a glimpse of one of the most elusive figures in history. Santa Claus, the jolly bringer of gifts, is maybe the most recognizable person in the world. And while he goes by many names across the globe and has been influenced by everyone from Coca-Cola to Norse mythology, he can be traced to a real person, Nicholas of Lycia, or St. Nicholas. Welcome, I'm Mick Biddick, and this is a very special St. Nicholas Day version of History is Criminal. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the sometimes scandalous story of jolly old St. Nick. While the records of Nicholas's early life are scant and non-existent, tradition tells us he was born on the 15th of March in 270 in the village of Lycia in what is today Turkey. Nothing is really known about young Nicholas's life until his teenage years, but what does seem to be known is that he came from a family of some wealth and that he wasn't above sharing that wealth with those in need. It's during his late teens that we get the first story of his generosity, a trait that will become one of the key figures of his legend. The story starts with a poor man with 3 daughters. The family struggled to feed themselves, and out of desperation, the father starts to contemplate selling his daughters into prostitution. We have no idea what other things the man tried first, but at this point, he seems to think this is the only solution to his economic problems. It was at this point in the story that Nicholas got wind of the father's plans. Late at night, Nicholas snuck through the quiet streets under the cover of darkness. When he reached the home of the impoverished family, he tossed a bag of gold coins through the window. On finding the coins the next morning, the father was overjoyed. He used the coins as a dowry for his eldest daughter and was able to marry her off to a man who could support her. I know the story reeks of the patriarchy here, but it was the 3rd century, so not much in the way of women's rights. Unfortunately, this only lessened the trouble for the family. With no way to support the remaining family, the father once again looked at selling his daughters into prostitution, and once again Nicholas made the nocturnal visit, and the second daughter was saved by another bag of gold coins. Remember, again, this is the 3rd century, so again, used the money as a dowry, married off the second daughter. The poor man became very curious as to who his benefactor was, so when his third daughter was facing the possibility of life in the world's oldest profession, he remained awake to catch the kindly person in the act. This time, when the gold came through the window, the man burst out of his door to thank his generous stranger. His eyes filled with tears, the man thanked Nicholas, but Nicholas refused his thanks and told the man to keep his identity secret, which apparently the man didn't do, since we now have this story. Now, some have this story taking place when Nicholas was just a boy. Other place this story at the time that he was the bishop of Myra in modern day Demir. It's also said that he gave his sizable inheritance away to feed the poor, making him, if nothing else, a good person. But just one act of kindness doesn't get one canonized as a saint. He'll be credited with numerous miracles. The miracle that seems to be the most shocking was when he raised 3 boys from the dead. Raising people from the dead is a pretty big deal in and of itself. This miraculous story gives the bringing back of the dead a gruesome twist. It seems that there was a slight famine going on in the area around Myra. People were hungry, food prices climbed, setting the stage for those without morals to take advantage. A butcher, who lacked basic human principles, thought of a way to make a quick buck or two from the crisis. Luring 3 boys to a slaughterhouse, the butcher kills the boys. Once he dismembers them, he stuffed them in a large pickle barrel. His plan was to sell the boys as pork. I would assume most likely hot dogs. After all, who would know the difference? Nicholas was made aware of the murders and the plans to sell off the fraudulent swine in a dream. He charged into the butcher shop and confronts the killer. The butcher, of course, denies the killing and denies trying to sell dismembered boys as pork. However, Nicholas removed the lid off the pickle barrel and commands the boys to rise, which they did. Now alive and in their whole boy like form, while the story doesn't go into what happened, we'd have to assume the butcher at least got some really bad Yelp reviews out of this. In the late 3rd and 4th centuries, Christianity was illegal in the Roman Empire. Nicholas, who was becoming a known leader in the region, was rounded up with other practitioners of the faith and sent to be punished. The idea was to torture the followers of the Christian religion, forcing them to renounce their beliefs and agree to worship the gods of Rome. This was known as the Great Persecution, lasting from 303 to 313. While it is unclear how long Nicholas faced torture, we know he refused to denounce his beliefs. Legend said that he was freed by the Emperor Constantine, who legalized the Christian faith in 313. Now, as any good Christian with money in the early 4th century, Nicholas would have made a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Before his ships could reach landfall, it was caught in a powerful storm. Violent winds and waves tossed the ship. Think the SS Minnow on Gilligan's Island. But before the ship and crew could be lost, Nicholas rebuked the waves and calmed the seas. This story was spread by sailors over the next century or so, and sailors began to pray to Nicholas for safe journeys or to calm the weather, leading to Nicholas becoming the patron saint of sailors. Once in the Holy Land, it is said he took up residence at a crypt near Bethlehem. Praying and studying and fasting near the site of Jesus' birth, he gained a greater spiritual strength that he would return to Myra with. The crypt he is said to have lived in is today marked by a sign that says the Church of St. Nicholas. As he returned home, the Bishop of Myra died. Local priests were unsure who should replace the revered leader and wanted a sign from God. It was decided that the first priest to enter the church would be the man to take over as bishop. It was then that Nicholas walked into the church for morning prayers, and he was then named the Bishop of Myra in about 317. As bishop, he became known for his many works of generosity. It even seems to have gotten involved in some legal affairs of some condemned prisoners. The stories vary from one telling to the next. At times, they seem to intertwine a little bit. Honestly, it's hard to tell if this is one story or if it's two stories that are so similar that they get jumbled together. But 3 men are about to be put to death by a general. Before the sentence can be carried out, Nicholas hears of the situation and comes to the defense of the 3 men. He points that the men are not guilty, but in fact it was the general's own incompetence that had led to the crime of which the men are accused. In another story, perhaps a different version of the same tale, it's 3 generals who have been accused by a corrupt politician of plotting against Emperor Constantine. Notice this 3 comes up quite a bit here. This is sort of important, that number 3. The generals are sentenced to be executed. Nicholas, knowing the men were wrongly accused, appears to the emperor in a dream and convinces him of the men's innocence. Constantine then spares the men and has the corrupt official arrested. This might be part of the reason that Nicholas, in addition to being the patron saint of sailors, is also the patron saint of thieves. Nicholas was then asked to join other church leaders at the Council of Nicaea. While historians debate whether or not Nicholas was present at Nicaea, it does give us one of the least Santa Claus-like stories of St. Nicholas. First, some background. The early church was a massive amalgamation of beliefs and rituals. The Council of Nicaea was called to try and give the church some commonality. One idea that didn't sit well with many in the church's fathers were the ideas proposed by Arius. Arianism said that Jesus was finite, a mortal man born of God and Mary, a demigod, if you will, much in the tradition of Greek and Romans. This would call into question the Holy Trinity and even the resurrection and many of the other basic tenets of the Christian religion. This dogma, presented by Arius, was spread across both the Eastern and Western Christian worlds. It was controversies like this that the council had been called to fix. According to legend, Nicholas confronted Arius at the Council of Nicaea. Each man was dedicated to their version of religious truth, and an argument broke out. Imagine people fighting about religion. It was at this point that Nicholas, having too much Arius' nonconformist views, punched him in the mouth. That's right, it seems that Santa Claus had a nasty right hook, although it's reported that he actually slapped Arius. In any case, this didn't sit well with the other bishops, and Nicholas was taken to Constantine. The emperor, seeing this as a religious matter, said it was up to the bishops to decide Nicholas's punishment. So they stripped him of his bishophood and his bishop robes, and he was chained up and tossed in a cell. While praying for forgiveness to Jesus and Mary, they both appeared to Nicholas and asked Nicholas why he was in jail. And he responded, "Because of my love for you." At this, Mary restores his bishop robes and unchains him. The next morning, when the jailer checks on Nicholas, he sees him in his finery, quietly studying scripture. When Constantine was told of what transpired, Nicholas was ordered released and returned as Bishop Emeria. The council would adopt Nicholas's arguments as the Nicene Creed, and the beliefs of Arius were labeled as heretical. It was this removal of Nicholas from the Council of Nicaea for hitting Arius that probably leads to the confusion as to whether or not he was there, because his name would have been stripped from all the official records, but then added in back later. And this is why it's decades after the Council of Nicaea that we see the first records of Nicholas appearing at Nicaea. Now, Nicholas will die on the 6th of December, 343, at the age of 73 years old, most likely from a plague that had ravaged the region at the time. People around the world celebrate the 6th of December as St. Nicholas Day. Due to his penchant for giving gifts and his general generosity, along with the proximity to Christmas, he and the holiday have become intertwined. But that is far from the end of Nicholas's travels. On his death, he was entombed in Myria, in present-day Turkey. But it seems he wouldn't stay there. By the late medieval period, having a relic tied to a saint was a big draw, not only for a church, but for a whole town. Relics meant pilgrims. Pilgrims spent money, and with the growing embers of capitalism spreading across the Christian world, saints were a commodity to be exploited. It wasn't unusual for a town, a little down on their luck, to procure a relic from somewhere else and call it their own. So it was in 1087 that the town of Bari in Italy decided to liberate the bones of St. Nicholas from Myria. Now, Myria had recently fallen to Muslim Turks, giving Bari the excuse that the saint's bones were now in danger. The bones had become famous because they emitted this oozy, oily substance called manna. This manna was said to have healing powers. Nicholas' tomb had become a popular site for pilgrims. So, in 1087, 3 ships carrying 47 men sailed in the spring from Bari to Myria. When the well-armed men came ashore in Myria, they quickly barged into the church and demanded to know the location of St. Nicholas's bones. The monks resisted, but were soon tied up and threatened, causing them to name the location they had hid the bones. Breaking into the tomb, they found the bones in a puddle of manna. The bones were gathered up, and the men reboarded the ship and returned to Bari. Upon their return, triumphant with the bones of the saint, the men were greeted as heroes. The town constructed a new basilica to house the relics, and the men and their families were even given a percentage of the offerings left at the tomb. To this day, people by the thousands come to Bari to witness the relics. The Feast of Translation of St. Nicholas is held on the 9th of May to mark the year the bones were moved to Bari, or you could say the bones were stolen and taken to Bari. Maybe that's why St. Nicholas is also the patron saint of thieves. Could be getting thieves pardoned, or it could be that his bones were stolen. So St. Nicholas ends up the patron saint of thieves, sailors, and children. Also on this day, the rector of the basilica collects a small amount of manna from the bones. The manna is then mixed with a large amount of holy water, is bottled, and sold. While it allows believers to possess their own relic of the saint, some believe it has healing powers if drank. Now, I'm not one to call into question anybody's religious convictions or anyone's faith, but drinking weird ooze that comes from 1600-year-old bones of a presumed saint, I'm not into that one. But wait, Bari is not the only place claiming to have the bones of St. Nicholas. Venice, Bari's rival, says they actually beat the Barbarians to the bones in Barbarians. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. To the bones in Mira. They say they stole the bones before Bari made it to Mira. This controversy raged for centuries until a study of the bones concluded that both sets of bones came from the same man who died at approximately 70 years old. Most likely, one got there first, grabbing the bones, but left some behind. Then the other snatched up the remaining bones. Other small fragments of the bones have been given to various churches around the world. Among those in the U.S. include the relic at St. Martha of Bethany in Morton Grove, Illinois. Yes, that's right. There are bones of a 4th century Turkish saint living in Morton Grove, Illinois. Those bones in Morton Grove, Illinois were radiocarbon dated to the 4th century and were most likely taken from either Venice or Bari. Nothing like sharing the bones of a saint. In recent years, Mera, now known as Demir, Turkey, has talked about asking Rome to return the bones for them to be re-enshrined in the original tomb, which archaeologists uncovered in 2022. Now, while Turkey is 90% Muslim, the relic might not possess a strong religious connection to the people, but it would make a wonderful addition to the tourism trade. So, we may say Merry Christmas to jolly old St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Sinterklaas, Julius, Pierre Noel, or whatever name he goes by. Until next time, this has been History is Criminal. Join us again next week as we get back to our regularly scheduled programs. And happy St. Nicholas Day to all.
Now I think I'll leave to you what to give the rest. Choose for me, dear Santa Claus, you will know the best.